$200,000 in the three best Fidelity index funds can land in two completely different places. One of them is a $6.8 million account, paying John over $11,000 a month in dividends, and he never sells a share to get that. The other one is almost $13.9 million. Same money, same three funds, the only difference is how much of each one he buys. In this video, John takes that $200,000 and spreads it across the best three Fidelity index funds, built to cover everything from America's biggest companies to the fastest-growing corners of the world. Then he builds two completely different portfolios out of those same three, one built to pay him and one built to grow. And by the end, you'll see how one version pays John $11,268 a month for life, and the other turns his $200,000 into a $13.9 million account. Now, none of that happens if the three funds are wrong. So that's the first problem we need to solve. $200,000 is enough money that John can't just buy whatever looks good. On $5,000, you can make a sloppy pick and the market covers for you. On $200,000, one weak fund costs six figures over the long term, and there's no version where he gets that back. So he's working to a rule. Every fund he buys has to do a job the other two can't do for him. And that rule cuts Fidelity's lineup down fast. There are hundreds of funds to choose from, and that's the problem. Plenty of them are genuinely great and still overlap almost completely with each other. At the same time, buying two of these just means owning the same companies twice. So three jobs narrow it down. 1. Own America. 2. Own the fastest moving slice of America harder than the market does on its own. And 3. Own the rest of the planet, because there have been long stretches where the American market went nowhere and the money had to come from somewhere. John starts at the foundation around which the whole portfolio is built, the Fidelity Total Market Index Fund. Think of a supermarket. The S&P 500 is the big brands sitting right there at eye level, the ones you already reach for without even checking. FSKAX takes those and then buys every other shelf in the building on top, all the way down to the products that haven't caught on yet. That's roughly 3,700 American companies for one ticker. It follows the total U.S. stock market, so it isn't choosing anything. It owns the country's public companies at whatever size they happen to be that day. Since this is the first one, here's the machinery you'll find underneath all three. An index fund follows a written rule. There's no manager inside making calls, no meeting about whether Apple had a good quarter. The rule says, buy these companies at these weights, and the fund does exactly that forever. That's the whole operation, which is why it costs roughly 1/100th of what a human stock picker charges you. The top of FSKAX looks like you'd guess. NVIDIA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet. NVIDIA's the single largest holding at 7%, and the 10 biggest positions together come to about 35% of the fund. Dividends are going to come up constantly from here on, so quickly, a dividend is a company handing shareholders a cut of its profits, usually 4 times a year. Hold more shares, get a bigger cut. FSKAX runs a 0.95% dividend yield, a 5.93% dividend growth rate, and 12.55% a year in share price appreciation. And that 12.55% becomes the yardstick. Every other number in this video gets held up next to it. With this index fund, what John gives up is any chance of doing better than average. A fund that owns the whole market can't outrun the market, because the fund is essentially what the market is made of. Good year for American stocks? FSKAX has a good year. Exactly as good, never better. Owning everything at natural size does have a side effect, though. The companies actually driving the returns only count for as much as their size allows. NVIDIA gets its 7% and not a dollar more. Which raises the obvious question, what if John wants those companies counting for a whole lot more than that? Well, here we go. Imagine fewer companies and nearly double the concentration. That's FNCMX, the Fidelity NASDAQ Composite Index Fund. And it's the strangest thing in this video once you actually look inside it. It holds around 3,000 companies, which is fewer than FSKAX. And its 10 largest positions come close to 58% of the entire fund. FSKAX was 35%. Line up the same three names side by side. NVIDIA sits at 7% in FSKAX and over 11% here. Apple is close to 10%. Microsoft is over 7%. Three companies, more than a quarter of everything in the fund. Put another way, 3,000 companies on the label, 5 of them decide what happens. The reason it's built that way is close to an accident. The NASDAQ isn't a fund, and it isn't a company. It's a stock exchange, a place where shares change hands. Tech companies have been listing there since the 80s, so a fund tracking the NASDAQ ends up drenched in tech because of where those companies choose to register. The reality is, nobody sat down and decided tech was the play. Accident or not, it's worked, like you wouldn't believe. FNCMX has returned 16.66% a year in share price growth against FSKAX's 12.55%. 4 points, and 4 points compounded across 30 years. That's the entire distance between comfortable and rich. The income side runs the opposite way. A 0.48% dividend yield, lowest of the three, and a 6.91% dividend growth rate. Companies growing this fast would rather spend the money on themselves than post it back to you. Okay, that's 2 funds down, and every dollar John owns is registered in a single country. That reads like a non-issue, right up until you look at how long the American market has gone nowhere before. There was a stretch from 2000 to 2010 where it finished the decade lower than it started. To solve this problem, John needs an international fund, and for that, Fidelity offers the Fidelity Total International Index Fund. This fund has the slowest growth number in the video, yet it's also the one both portfolios end up leaning on, and in the income build, it gets more money than the other two combined. FTIHX holds around 5,000 stocks. Not one of them is American. It covers 2 different worlds at once, the mature economies like Japan, Germany, the UK, France, and the ones still growing into their size, places like India, Taiwan, and Brazil. Most funds make you pick a side. This one skips the question. The holdings are names you've half heard: Taiwan Semiconductor, Nestle, SAP, and Novo Nordisk, whose weight loss drugs have been in the news for 2 years straight now. There's also ASML, which is worth stopping on for a second. Listen to this. There's a machine that costs around $200 million, weighs about as much as 2 buses, and is the only thing on the planet capable of printing the circuits inside a modern AI chip. ASML is the company that makes it. Not one of a few companies that make it, the only one. Every chip inside every American tech giant John bought came off of a Dutch machine at some point in its life. Crazy, right? Here's what makes this fund genuinely odd, though. Weakest share price growth of the 3 by a distance. That said, it's the fastest growing dividend of the 3. Also by a distance, 16.98% a year over the past decade, better than double what either American fund managed. FTIHX finishes at a 2.5% dividend yield, that 16.98% dividend growth rate we just discussed, and 6.87% annual appreciation. So John, buys it as insurance. Well, insurance and a bit of stubbornness. It becomes the one piece of the portfolio that doesn't care what happens in the United States. Now, the thing to carry forward is that split personality. Best income here, lowest growth over there. Both portfolios you're about to see are arguments about what to do with it. So the lineup is locked. Everything American, the fastest part of it, and everywhere else. 3 funds, 3 jobs, nothing doubled up. Picking 3 good funds is the easy part. Anyone watching could have done it. The decision that actually changes John's life is how much of each one John buys. Because these exact 3 funds build 2 portfolios worth $7 million apart. Weight them toward the funds that pay, and this thing hands John money every month for the rest of his life. Weight them toward the one that grows, and it finishes at close to twice the size. Same $200,000, same 3 funds, the weighting is the entire strategy. Next, I'll walk you through the dividend-tilted portfolio, the version that pays John over $11,000 every single month for life. And in the end, you'll see how the growth-tilted version takes that same $200,000 and turns it into a $13.9 million portfolio. All right, here we go. Let's build the first one, the version designed to pay John. Half the portfolio, $100,000 into FTIHX, the slowest growing thing John owns. I know that looks backwards until you remember what this build is for. FTIHX carries the highest yield at 2.5%, with that 16.98% dividend growth compounding behind it. And in a portfolio measured by what it pays, those are the only 2 figures that truly count. Then, $60,000, 30%, goes into FSKAX. Something has to grow the account, and the entire American market at 12.55% is the least dramatic way to make that happen. Finally, $40,000 into FNCMX for the last 20%. This is the piece people leave out of income portfolios, and then they wonder why the checks stop getting bigger. An account that stops growing pays the same amount forever. Then inflation eats the rest. So in this portfolio, half of John's money sits outside America. The other half is FSKAX and FNCMX, both fully domestic. Basically, the world is split straight down the middle, with the higher paying side taking the lead. Put those 3 weights together and the portfolio lands at a 1.63% dividend yield, an 11.65% dividend growth rate, and 10.53% annual appreciation. None of those 3 numbers look impressive on their own. What they do to each other over 30 years is the part worth seeing. And here's what the projections show. After year 1, the $200,000 would be worth $224,326. The dividends that year would come to about $3,262, which works out to roughly $272 a month. Nothing you'd retire on. By year 10, projections show it reaching $635,040 with the monthly dividend up to around $849. Still not life-changing, but notice that it more than tripled, while the account roughly tripled as well. The income is keeping pace. Year 20 is where it starts to look different. Projections have the account at $2,052,951, paying close to $3,063 a month. And by year 30, the dividend-tilted portfolio is projected to reach $6,771,176, generating $135,214 a year in dividends. That is $11,268 a month, every month, for as long as John holds it. Now, $11,268 a month sounds like a lot to get from $200,000, so let's be clear about where it's coming from. It isn't coming from $200,000, it's actually coming from $6.77 million. Work out what percentage that is. and it's roughly 2%, which is a completely normal amount for a fund to pay. The account got big. A normal payout on a big account is a big number. And here's the part that's easy to skip past. John never sells anything to get there. Not one share. Not in year 30, not in year 31 either. Everything he owns the day before the payment, he still owns the day after. The account would carry on growing the entire time that it's paying him. Of the $6,571,176 this portfolio would add on top of the original $200,000, roughly $5,484,446 would come from share prices climbing. The other $1,086,729 would come from dividends going straight back in. And that second number deserves a moment. When a dividend gets paid, it doesn't just sit around as cash. Instead, it buys more shares of the same fund automatically. More shares means the next dividend is bigger, and a bigger dividend buys more shares again. It's a wheel that spins faster every time it comes around, and 30 years, that is a lot of turns. $1 in every 6 of this portfolio's growth would come off that wheel, not from the market going up, but from income buying more income. But that's just one way to build this. Some of you have been sitting through all of that thinking, well, I don't want a monthly check at all. I just want the biggest number possible at the end. So what happens when John takes those same 3 funds and flips the weights? Let's build that one. $140,000, 70% of the money, into FNCMX. The 16.66% was the biggest figure in this video, and this build buys as much of it as it's willing to stomach. $40,000 into FSKAX. And finally, FTIHX, which was half the income build, falls all the way to just $20,000, 10%. Interesting, right? The two sides traded places almost exactly. International went from 50 down to 10. American went from 50 up to 90. Averaged out, this portfolio runs a 0.78% dividend yield, a 7.72% dividend growth rate, and 14.86% annual appreciation. So what does leaning that hard into appreciation actually buy John? For the first year, the two portfolios are basically indistinguishable. $231,270 here against $224,326 for the income build, $7,000 apart on $200,000. Then the distance starts opening. $839,710 at year 10, $3,435,751 at year 20, and $13,885,416 at year 30. Nearly $14 million out of $200,000 and 3 decades of leaving it alone. Almost none of that came from dividends. Of the $13,685,416 added, $13,537,945 is share prices rising. Dividend reinvestment contributed $147,471. Rounded off, and you're looking at 98.9% price growth, which lands exactly where you'd think. In year 30, this portfolio pays $10,945 for the whole year, $912 a month. So the growth build wins on size by $7 million. Whether that means it wins is a completely different question, open for debate. $11,268 against $912. That's the monthly income from the two builds. And the one paying $912 is the one worth twice as much. But nobody sits on $14 million simply collecting $912. They sell some of it. And there's a standard way to do that called the 4% rule. You take out about 4% a year and the account grows fast enough to fill that back in behind you. Essentially, you're picking the fruit instead of cutting down the entire tree. Run it on the big one, 4% of $13,885,416, is $555,417 a year. That's $46,285 a month against $11,268. Okay, so it appears the argument is over, right? Except nothing stops you running it on the smaller portfolio too. Check it out. 4% of $6,771,176 is $270,847 a year, or roughly $22,571 a month. So the honest comparison is $46,285 against $22,571, and the growth build still wins by exactly the ratio of the two account sizes. Here's the thing about 4% though. It's the generous end. That number came out of research done in the mid-90s built on shorter retirements. Plenty of people who do this for a living treat it as the ceiling and instead work between 2% and 3.5%, especially anyone retiring early. On $14 million, 3.5% would be $40,499 a month. 3% is $34,714, and at a properly cautious 2%, $23,142. All fortunes. But watch the direction. The safer John plays it, the smaller his paycheck gets. Now run that same test on the income portfolio. $135,214 out of $6,771,176 is 2% on the nose. It's already sitting at the most cautious number on that list, and it got there without withdrawing anything. John never chose a rate. The dividends just came to 2%, which stops being a technicality the moment the market drops. Let's say the market falls 30% the year John retires, and that's not a fantasy. That's happened 3 times in 25 years. The growth account goes from $13,885,416 to $9,719,791. He still needs his $555,417, which is 5.71% of what's left now. Every share is worth 30% less, so he sells about 43% more of them to raise the same money. The most shares he'll ever sell at the worst price he'll ever see, and they don't come back when the market recovers. Now look at the income account. It takes the same hit, down to $4,739,823. But, and remember this, dividends come out of company profits, and the profits don't fall 30% just because the stock market did. So $135,214 still lands. Shares sold? None. Dividends do get cut in a crash. They just fall far less than prices and recover much faster. That is the sequence of returns risk. It's why people retire with enormous accounts and still run low. So which one wins? On money, the growth build. At every rate on that ladder, it's the bigger number and twice the account doesn't bend. What the income build offers is the removal of a decision, which is a luxury. John never picks a rate, never times his retirement, never sits in a falling market working out how much to hand a buyer who's getting it half price. One clearly makes him richer. The other means he never has to be clever about it. Not once. Now, 30 years is one timeline, 20 is another, 10 is a different beast entirely. I ran the numbers on what it actually takes to hit $1 million on Fidelity index funds across all 3 timelines. That video is on screen right now.